بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم. My favorite thing about coming to ISMA conventions are the conversations. The conversations I get to have with old friends that I haven't seen for at least a year. The conversations I get to have with people that I just met. Especially young people. And I've had several young women come up to me during this very convention and ask me a question that I hear quite often. In fact, one particular young woman, I promised her that I was going to answer her question in my speech. That it was a longer conversation that we could have in the brief moments that I had between sessions. Her question was very simple and yet quite profound. She simply said, "What is your advice to a young person like me who's trying to make a difference today?" And I think her question merits a thoughtful answer, and that's what I hope to offer right now to all of you. What is my advice to her, to other young people, and to anyone who wants to make a difference in a time of great crisis? How should we be thinking and acting in this current moment? I want to be very succinct, I want to be very organized, because you've been sitting here so patiently, and I am one thing standing between you, Dr. Tariq Ramadan, and Nouman Ali Khan, so I'm not going to overstay my welcome. So there are three things I want to offer in response to this profound question. I think we have to think about courage, compassion, and connectedness if we want to make a difference in this moment of great crisis. I'm going to start with courage, because we are living in a time that requires incredible bravery. Just declaring our identities as Muslims has become an act of defiance. Wearing a burqini to the beach has become an act of defiance. Great courage, though, brothers and sisters, as I've tried to remind myself and those that have asked me, is not the absence of fear. Great courage, the kind that is needed today, is not the absence of fear. In fact, if we approach the kind of responsibility, the kind of stakes, the kind of risks, the challenge that we are up against today without a healthy dose of fear, then we are simply not healthy. We are simply not aware of what we're up against. So fear in this moment is rational and is healthy. But it's not the kind of fear that should cripple us. It's the kind of fear that makes us realize that we have to dig deeper than we ever have and reach up with more desperate dua than we've ever done, and find the strength to know that it's not that we're not afraid, because we are and we should be, but that we will find our courage by understanding that there is something more important than our fear. And that's how I define courage. The courage that is needed today. And one very important aspect, one very important dimension and requirement of this courage is the knowledge that it isn't just up to us to face today's challenges. You know, in the Quran, the difference between the believers when they were marching to meet Goliath and his army and those who waffled and wavered was not simply confidence in themselves, but it was their focus, their focal point. One perceived the world through the prism of Tawheed, and the other focused entirely on the means. One group found that courage because they said, Allah is with us. How many times has a small group defeated a large group? And they went on to the famous story of David and Goliath. While the other group said, we are overwhelmed by their numbers, and fell and gave in and indulged that fear. One group focused on the power of the Creator, and the other focused on their own inadequacy. So I'm not asking you today to simply have confidence in our capacity. That's not enough. I'm asking you to have faith. To make your faith conquer your fear. To find courage in the conviction that it's not just up to us. That what we are called for is obedience, not outcomes. When I am most afraid is when I think that my ability is what is required to bring about a positive outcome. When I instead focus on my ability to work, but know that Allah is in charge, I feel invincible. I feel empowered. I feel more courage than I should if you were to see what capacity I have. My sense of courage is in the knowledge that it's not up to me. That if I obey, whatever the outcome is, it is khair. So brothers and sisters, it is a time for courage. But it's also a time of and a need for great compassion. What do I mean by compassion? It's the kind of compassion that is needed to meet people where they are, to go to your audience, to your fellow citizens, to your neighbors, and even to your fellow Muslims, and meet them where they are, in their fear, in their ignorance, in their place of anger, and then to walk with them to a different space. This approach of compassion, when you feel that the world is so hostile, can only be born out of a conviction that you have something to contribute. You have something to give, rather than you have something to beg for or take from them. Our fellow citizens are not overlords to appease and to beg for acceptance and approval. And at the the same time, our audiences and those we engage are not enemies to conquer. They are our equals, our fellow human beings, that we have something to bestow upon them. We have something to contribute in that we are offering truth-telling as an act of compassion. Not just in what we say, but in the way that we act. I was so inspired when at ISPU we started doing research on the role of American Muslims in the Flint water crisis. So in Flint, people were literally dying because they didn't have clean water. A problem that we are supposed to only hear about in far-off lands, and yet it was right here in our country. Flint, Michigan, where the water was poisonous. And when we were doing this research, just trying to understand what were the contributions of Muslims in Michigan, we by accident, literally, came across the work of hundreds of Muslims in Flint and their role in the recovery effort. Quietly acting on their faith, leading in the recovery of a crisis in the way that no one knew. We discovered that Muslims had donated more water bottles than any other community. 1 million water bottles. Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. That Muslims had set up free medical clinics. That Muslims had set up institutions that would stay much longer for a sustainable relief effort long after the cameras had gone home. Doing this in the name inspired by their faith. Meeting people where they were in acts of compassion. They were not asking for anything. They were there to give. They were there to contribute. And this is the kind of role we have to see ourselves playing as people called on to act as noble servant leaders to those who are most in need. The worst thing that can happen to a community that is being attacked is for them to internalize a sense of victimization. That is not to trivialize the actual victimization that many of us are actually undergoing. But what I mean by an internalized victimization is one where we fall into learned helplessness, a sense of disempowerment, where we feel isolated, where we feel alone, where we see ourselves as in a state of defense, in a state where we just want to build bunkers around ourselves. That's the worst thing that could happen, because that is far from what we are called to do. We have to see ourselves as people who have a role in healing this nation from the deep traumas that our country is suffering from. So the second piece of advice that I give to this sister is we have to lead lives of compassion, where we are approaching our fellow human beings from a place of generosity, not a place of need. And the third and final thought, reflection I want to share with you is in connectedness. In seeing the connections between ourselves, our struggle, and those of other human beings. If we don't understand Islamophobia as just one dimension of a wider phenomena of institutional racism, then we are not seeing the full picture. We are but one, as my colleague and brother Dawood put it today, we are one branch. Islamophobia is one branch on a larger tree of institutionalized racism. If we don't see a connection, if it has to be explained to us that the same cancer that causes law enforcement to disproportionately target Muslim communities for surveillance, entrapment, and criminalization is the same ailment that results in the shooting and killing of unarmed black people every day, then we are not seeing the whole picture. That's one cancer, and these are two different manifestations. We need to see the connection between our humanity and those of others. And that means authentic relationships and coalition building between communities. One of the most dangerous goals of any kind of bigotry is to convince the target of that racism that they are alone, that they are isolated, that they are weak, that they are defeated. And it is the opposite of the truth. I'm often asked in lots of different venues, after I give a talk about the importance of standing against bigotry, someone will always say, well, you're just preaching to the choir. We already know this. You should be talking to, XYZ hostile people. And of course, there's merit to engaging those who you may deeply disagree with. But I actually have a problem with this idea of preaching to the choir. And here's why. We should start with those who are receptive to the message of an inclusive, pluralistic America. We should begin with them. And guess what? There are way more people that are receptive to that message than we have reached. They are reaching their hand to us, and we haven't reached back. We are, in fact, sometimes too busy running after those who hate us, that will never listen to us, that we haven't done the hard work of actually building relationships and coalitions with, quote, the choir. The second thing about preaching to the so-called choir is every single one of those people that is in that room listening to you has members of their family and friends who, I assure you, are not in the choir. And they can become ambassadors to those people who will not listen to you or me, but would listen to a family member that they trust. So to see the interconnections between ourselves means to reach out to those first who are receptive. I mean, this is just business strategy. If you have a marketplace and 30% of that marketplace are untapped, eager consumers, do you go after them first, or the people that you have to spend billions of dollars to even get them to listen to half of what you have to say? And yet there is a huge portion of the American public that are eager partners that we have never taken the time and effort to reach out to. And these are the people we need to start with. So in closing, I want to say that as scared and as exhausted as some of us feel, and understandably so, I believe that, as Dr. Yesser said, this is a beautiful time, a profound time, and an inspiring time to be a Muslim. We have an opportunity to change history, and I believe that we truly can do it with the help of Allah. Assalamu alaikum.